everyone. How are you doing? The little red light says that I am live. So I felt alive before the red dot. But anyway, how are you doing? So coming into an unusual hour and probably an unusual show, but not so much actually. So give me a second here. I'm driving while I'm talking. So, hey, there's 8 of us in here, and this is good. Well, Dalton Gaming, hello. I am Minsky. Good to see you. Rachel, hello. Well, and we're growing by the second. So, welcome to what I hope to be kind of not a regular series, but a something that we'll do more frequently than not, and that's kind of really get into an hour where philosophers can gather. And that's what I'm looking for. Hi, Sandra D. Good to see you. Deb, good to see you. Luminous, good to see you. Lit-T, good to see you. Hello, everyone. Tanis, good to see y'all. So where truly philosophers can come and not be badgered by those who have a difficult time in being able to have a larger perspective. And I thought what I would do, give me 1 second here, because I do this. This is just how my philosophy works. So I thought I would do a little PowerPoint. And I love this. We all know who Plato is. The beginning is the most important part of the work. I think I look at each day like that now. There's a continuation, but there's also, a beginning. So when we talk philosophy, I think it's important as well is to see where philosophy has given birth and how it's contributed to humanity. It's really kind of a Hellenistic culture. It was the center of Hellenistic culture at Alexandria, the Greek architect. All of this was how we look at the beginning of man's true philosophy. So what is philosophy? The word philosophy is derived from the Old Greek and Roman word philosophia. Philo, Sophia. Philo is love of, Sophia, wisdom. So philosophia, love of wisdom. And that's what I hope that we have here is just a real, I'd love to see thousands of people in here that are really, truly seekers of wisdom. And, if you're here, I think that you qualify for that. So philosophy, the love of wisdom. Philosophers were people who discussed, debated, and studied wisdom. I wish we could go back and bring back today where every city, every community would have its own amphitheater or a place. We don't have this today, and this is the problem with our civilization, our culture, our society. We think we're so bright, but all it really comes down to is that what we are very good at tidbits. We see so often that with society as it is today, that people will spout tidbits and try to cite something else, but never fully absorbing it themselves by actually studying. 3 great philosophers were Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Now, I have a challenge for anyone in here, and I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to go into the chat room because I want to actually ask this question directly. So give me 1 second here. Okay, here we are. So there's 103 of us in here, 104. My challenge, and I'm just going to wait because I can see how everyone is in here in the chat room. Please list me 1 modern philosopher. I'm going to wait. Name me 1 Modern day philosopher. I can play the Jeopardy song while we're doing this, but that would be a copyright issue. So, all right. So can anyone, there's 110 people watching, anyone list a modern day philosopher? No. Okay, Ron, I would have to disagree with that. Let's talk about an individual that you could actually physically go see, not someone who's channeling, but someone physically. Wayne Steiger. Okay. Well, the only one that I can really true, and you can see it on my channel, is Alan Watts. I love Alan. He passed on, and but Alan Watts, he really catapulted me when I was coming out of the God spell. And we're going to talk about this because this is how I arrived at what I realized was my life destiny, and that was the pursuit of a philosopher mission. So we got a couple of people in here: John Hogue, excuse me, Alex Jones. Well, I guess in a way, I can see this. And, and listen, I'm not saying none of these people are. It's just that when we really think about it, and I'm going to go back now to the presentation, we really don't know. I'm trying to find it here. So that is where, give me a second here. There we go. We left it at. It's very difficult because you see, we don't have those places where you can go and have a civil discourse, a debate. When I was in school, I remember I enjoyed the debate club. I excelled at it because it taught a discipline of the mind. Back down off your emotions, make sure your thoughts are coherent, and make sure that in your debate that you can back up that which you are saying, particularly if you're going to do a counterpoint. Being on YouTube, you have to have thick skin, particularly with some of the subjects that I deal with. It causes cognitive dissonance in a lot of people, particularly where you get into religion. And religion and philosophy are, they are symbiotic to one another, as is science, making it at the triad. So when we begin to look at this, so Homer Simpson, philosophy, the love of wisdom. Epistemology, I did a whole program on that, the theory of knowledge. How many of you actually have ever studied epistemology? It's fascinating. Metaphysics, most people in here are pretty much well-versed with that. Ethics, the study of right and wrong. People sometimes come down on me because they say, well, you used to be a Christian and now you're very anti-Christian. No, what they don't understand is that I'm anti-religion. I don't think that mankind necessarily needs to be subservient to a construct that's never appeared, nor can be manifested. And then when you're dealing with that, well, then you're dealing with more of the ethereal. Anyway, political philosophy, philosophy of religion. You look at this and you think about religion, aesthetics, you look at, atheism, you look at Eastern philosophy, and what it leads you down to, or to up to, depends on, I think it's actually up to, is logic. There comes a point where logic has to become the kind of litmus test to find that out. So here's the problem that so often people, hold on 1 second, please. We just had some serious jets go over. We've had a lot of military activity today. Anyway, so here's the problem when you begin to study philosophy from an academic point. There's two different type of philosophers. There's those who basically have centered in intellectualism, and that primarily sits in academia. And then you have souls like myself. We were philosophers probably before we were born, probably philosophers in the past, probably be a philosopher in the future. So Van Inwigen observes in a footnote that the argument depends upon the assumption that logically equivalent propositions are identical, or at least that a proposition cannot explain a fact to which it is logically equivalent. For the record, I believe that this latter claim is false, but don't take my word for it. Now, that's babble. To me, it makes absolutely no. I know what the words mean. I can put that in there and I can translate in my mind. But the question is, why? I mean, this is one that you almost have to go and say, all right, the logical equivalent. Well, I have to know what the topic is, but that's what's supposed to be, the framework. Logically equivalent propositions are identical. You see what this is? Now, if we had the forums, we could really get into some great discussions, but we don't have it. And that's the interesting thing about the first century. So in the first cue card we have to put on here, we're going to be dealing with the first century here very quickly. All right, some philosophers and others sought to establish norms as to what kinds of argument were not acceptable. And there's the conundrum. And thus improve the decision-making by avoiding arriving at a bad conclusion. So we had to begin to frame thought, right? Without thought, you don't have topic. Without topic, you don't have debate. So, for instance, you see so often, and particularly in this computer age with electronic chat, someone will make a very crude comment. Don't believe him. He's a pervert. Well, as philosophers, we look at those people, and what we see is that these kinds of bad argument later came to be called fallacies. So those who create fallacies, you can begin to take the intellectual approach and understand where they are intellectually. I found that people who have a lot of anger, a lot of hate, a lot of that negative, they don't get into philosophy. They just don't. And there's a reason for it. They can be seen as the weakest negative constraint upon the discussion, and that's why they don't. Let's continue to go into definitions. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, deriving from the meaning science, which investigates the nature of being, Aristotle. Logical inquiry into the nature of reality, Radaha Krishnan. Science of knowledge, Vecchi. The science of criticism, of cognition, Kant. Knowledge of the eternal nature of things, Plato. Vision of life, Indian approach. Attempt to present a systematic view of life, Henderson. Persistent effort to make life intelligible and meaning, Bermold. And science of all sciences, arts of all arts. So again, here's one that's actually taught in college level, philosophy from the Greek word, as we discussed. Morality, we discussed this, the study of ethics. Motive, the intention, moral or good, that someone has for doing something. Jennifer Collins and I had a great discussion yesterday about Hitler and other people like him. Consequence, the result or after effects of an action. That goes right over into Newtonian physics. again, love of wisdom. We all look at this, and when you look at, for instance, in my um, professional life, you get a chance to meet a lot of different people. And the one thing I always found about graphic designers was that they had a natural ability for aesthetics. They just, when you get a good graphic designer, and it never occurred to me until much later in life, they were true alchemists. They were also philosophers. They didn't realize it. All right, so some characteristics of the practice of philosophy: linguistic reasoning, argument and counter argument, and do that in a level that it's not hurling insults. It's actually exchanging idea for idea. Seeks general and abstract formulations, worked examples and counterexamples, analogies to establish possibilities, meta-linguistic activity, situating with reference to tradition and history, the written word. And these days, it's hard to really determine what the written word unless you actually have it in print. Dense and obscure purposes, and I just don't happen to think the last one. I think that's a funny put in there. So we're going to be talking today about my favorite philosopher. This man right here, has more impact on my life. I think probably the second greatest philosopher would be Alan Watts. And this is Philo of Alexandria. Lived, and we're going to find out here, in 30 BC to 50 AD. He was Jewish. He is called the rabbi of the great synagogue in Alexander, and he establishes theological schools in Alexander. He's a very interesting individual. This man, as it turns out, although a lot of about his life was obscure because his writings were more embedded into the Torah and the Pentateuch as to his philosophy. This man is probably the man who most added to the Hellenistic religion that today is called Christianity. This is the man who actually brought the concept of Father, God. Remember, in Judaism, God was not looked at, nor still today in Judaism, and that's why Philo was considered as a heretic in many ways, that he brought in the whole concept of Father God. Now, the interesting thing about, and I'll just send it out here, is that I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. And isn't that the truth? So here's the deal. There we go. I'm back. Oh, there's 160 of us in here. That started my journey on finally rounding the corner of what I call about a 40-year distraction. And Philo, how I came to know Philo was this. When I began, and I read, and I brought these books so we could see. And by the way, I just want to show you, this was my Bible. This Bible I bought in 1984. And I have to hold it closed because the binding, the pages are falling out. Decades and decades of notes in here. And when I began to awake from the God spell, and that's what I titled it, and that's what I say it is, I began to find some things that was troubling. And by the way, just so you know, this is the book we will be using. A lot of people want to know the book. So let me turn it over here. Did I get that right? There we go. Sorry about that, folks. So it's a good book. There'll be a couple of others that will actually reference that as well. So I started this journey. And the first book in my philosophy of religion was this. And I highly recommend this book. This book was called, it's called The Search, right? By Dr. Charles, as you can see, Ron Charles. It's interesting, his findings, because in his findings, as he went back to try to establish the reality, the factual history of an individual called Jesus Christ, his conclusions most don't like. But one of the great things that Dr. Charles did in his book is that he busts the myth about what most people in the West think of what first century Jerusalem was like. And shockingly, do you know why the Romans valued Judea? The rest of the Middle East was it was a desert, you know, full of nomadic tribes that had the Silk Road. You know, the trade routes are what the Romans wanted to the east, but all roads led into Jerusalem. And so the Herod family played a vital role here. And Herod was not this depiction of what so many people think of Herod. Actually, Herod was a very wise king. Do you know it was mandated by the king every child from the age of 5 to 17 went to school? The Romans valued the Judeans so much because they were intelligent. They were educated. They could read. They could write. They could, most of them spoke multiple languages, at least 3. And what you also found out was that in Jerusalem in the first century, the city was basically kind of divided. You had those of the strict who break traditions, and then you had those that were of the Hellenistic, the Essenes. And hi, Trish. So these people wrote, and that's what made it so interesting that we never found records. I mean, you think about this, and this is where it got me to started questioning. Well, if these people were educated, they could read, they could write, they could draw. Why didn't we ever see any drawings? Again, you know what we do find all along the trade routes, the roads the Romans built, including in Judea, we found graffiti. All right, that seems to be a common denominator. Pornography, oddly enough. So that is oddly enough a common denominator. And the thing that always got me was that, well, then why didn't we find any pictures of this person called the Christ? I mean, if he had the thousands following, surely someone would have drawn. They could draw. I mean, you don't have to be educated to draw. You see where I came from. And then this book, and it's a good read, I recommend it highly, led me to this book. Because you remember, this was something that I had to get determined in my own life. And what it came down to was that it was impossible for this story to have any foundation. And give me one second. So I said, well, okay, let's look at this logically. You know, typically you have your Bible. That's what everyone uses. And they think that that's an historical document. It's not. So who could we find that was around, who we know specifically went to Jerusalem in 37 AD. Why? Are some of you getting it? Philo. Now, the interesting thing about Philo was this. Never wrote about any crucifixion, never wrote about any supposed Messiah that had risen from the dead. It's devoid. Nothing. And that got me to thinking, well, now wait a minute. If this is a man that we know lived, we know his family. In fact, here's the interesting thing about Philo. His family was related to the Herodians, Herod's family. Do you know who Herod's family was related to? The Flavians. How many of you remember me talking about the Flavians? Okay, so gets better, folks. This guy. This is the complete works of Josephus. Do you see that name, folks? Flavius Josephus. I got Herod. I got Alexandria. Now I got the Flavians. Is anyone getting this? No. You know what? Truth on one truth. We're not getting into religious dogma here. In this room, and I'll just set the boundaries on this, we're not debating the concept of Luciferians, if they exist or don't exist. That's not the purpose here. The purpose here is the pursuit of wisdom, knowledge, regardless of what knowledge may be, good or bad, contrary to your thoughts or anyone else's thoughts or mine. It's still knowledge. And if you ignore knowledge, then that says you're not a pursuit of philosophy. So now we have Josephus, who is, by all accounts, the historian. No, he titled himself that. Most people have never studied Josephus. They haven't even read his works. So they only hear this because of what others say. I dare say anyone who cares to come in and talk about the antiquities of the Jews, you have an open invitation. If we want to get into the war of the Jews, well, this begins to get to the whole histories of the Jews. So think about this now. We've got Herod, we've got Philo, we've got the Flavians, we've got the Herodians, all dealing in Jewish culture. Now, Philo, interestingly enough, excuse me, my dog's probably going to freak out on that, was that it was his view of, well, Judaism. There appears to be a link that Paul, Saul of Tarsus, was a student to a great degree of Philo. It's because Paul incorporated a lot of Philo's views. And he's the one who brought in the Trinity. So I just have a few things that, to kind of bring us into where this guy is at. First century. It's so interesting for me on the first century that it was truly the last century of enlightenment. After the first century, mankind went into darkness. Books were burned. Records were burned. People were burned. Now, Philo incorporated a lot of his works according to the Torah. And another great book I would recommend. It's just a great book and what he has done here in writing this. In fact, excuse me. I'll just read you a little bit of this. Philo's biography has shown him at the crossroads of Judaism, Hellenism, and Roman civilization. We now pose the question of discovering what he knew in these three areas. We begin by seeing how many tendencies collide in Jewish world, whether Palestine or Hellenistic. The late Judaism is simultaneously a period of messianic zealots and cosmopolitan Herodians, of Pharisaic legalism and the Essene pietism. I learned from Philo what he wrote about in these cultures because as a philosopher, he was wealthy. He could take the path of not having to work. He could take the path of endeavoring to study. And that's what he did. And when you find out all of these groups, and again, if you look at them, the crossroads of Judaism, Hellenism, and Roman civilization, from this is where Christianity came forth. The whole ideology of the theology of Christianity. And this guy here, getting back to Paul, it appears that Paul was a study of Philo, knew of him, and although never directly quoted him, the similarities of much of Philo's philosophy seems to be showing up in particularly the Pauline letters. So, but all you can do is just look at the evidence. And so the thing I found out about, and there's one other book, because we'll be talking in future ones. This is a great one. On the creation of the cosmos according to Moshe. And this one will really blow you away. I found a lot about the man. You learn about not only Judaism, but you really find so much of the debate within where Judaism was at. Because you have to understand, at the first century, Judaism was at a crossroads. We can identify that period as probably one of the most unique periods in the roads of humanity. The thing that was so interesting about the first century was that we began to have this collapse, so to speak, of ideologies that had lasted millennia. And while that was going on, the ideologies were, for the most part, how shall we say, highly sanitized. And the interesting thing about Philo and his family is that his family goes back to apparently the time of Alexander the Great. And what Alexander the Great did on the consciousness of humanity was this, is that he bridged the East to the West. Many people think of China as that East, but actually you have to look at what India and how India played a role, not only of the fact of that it was a thriving civilization, culture of its own, but that the fact that India was truly kind of the crossroads of theology, religion, politics, customs. And so after Alexander and his conquest, through the Hellenization, by the way, and understanding what to be Hellenized is to simply, I like to say, you become much more broad-minded, much more accepting. That's the problem I have today, was that I can't agree with any of the world religions. No matter what side you take, when you immediately align yourself with that side, well, then it's you against, the rest of the world. And that's lunacy. Either they're all wrong or they're all right. So when you begin to think about, for me, when I walked away from Christianity, you got no more safety net. I mean, you don't get to die and say, all right, well, I'm just going to lead my soul go to Jesus. Well, I keep saying, part of the philosophy is also you have to begin to look at the factual part of things. And there was no person ever named Jesus. Now people go and they say, well, his name was Yeshua. Well, maybe, maybe not. We don't have any records of him. Not even from his own lineage of Judaism. No record of it. People will try to quote Josephus, and I'll say this for the record. That was a forgery put in at the same time the other forgery of a doctrine of where Christianity, Catholicism, was heading. It's amazing to me when you think about how, and this is how I was, everything was filtered through the Bible. Everything, my philosophy, my reasoning, my logic. And the problem was I allowed that to become an excuse for everything. And when I pursued the love of wisdom above religion, above my own free will and thought, well, realities start crashing in. Because now I don't have an escape. I don't. So for me, I best find out what's going on here. So that began the search of learning wisdom. And wisdom comes both ways. I see that, you can tell, I can see in the people that are watching, and I just appreciate the fact that many of you are in here and you're having a good discussion. I can't read these all because if that, I just become like reading a great unfolding live document. So finding out what a mind perceives their perception of reality and then write it down became a wonder for me. I literally, in a sense, it seemed almost like I had come out of this metamorphosis, that this was my life's destiny. I had gained 60 years of knowledge, actually experienced it. When I was on the street at the age of 15, I was very fortunate to be around people. I look now that I do have spirit guides, because I'll just give you some examples. When I was 15, I started taking my first LSD trips. I met a group that were into Native American philosophy. And I was young. I was an angry young man. Billy Joel wrote that song about that. But there was a part of me that was drawn to that. And so I began to study. I began to listen. I began to listen to the elders. I didn't have any parents. No one was watching over me. So I could go out, and many times I did. Went out to West Texas, and we would have our vision quest. And I began to then, the first time I met a young woman that was believing in Krishna at that time. And so when George Harrison came out with his album, All Things Must Pass, that album was heavily influenced on me spiritually. It ministered to me in a way. And so I began to find out more about the ways of the Hindus. And I never took to it. It just seemed to me to not work. Um, Now, as I said, that there was someone watching over me. In 1970, there were two events that almost lost my life. The first one was where I was living at, and anyone that's in the Houston area, I know I have a lot of people from Houston listening. And if you go back to the Montrose area, take yourself a little visit to the corner of Indiana and Commonwealth, and you will see that that house used to be called Family Connection. Anyway, inside the house, where the boys lived, and there was 3 stories, but the second story was where the girls stayed. And I came in one evening and put my hand, and I'll see there, you can still see it. I put my hand through a French door. And when I knocked on it and pulled my hand back out, well, it cut that artery and those 2 tendons. And I remember watching my vital blood pumping out. And I mean, folks, when you hit a major artery, you know that it begins to really go a long way. So just about lost it there. And then the interesting thing was on December 19th at 5:20 p.m., 1970, I was hit by a car. I was crossing the street and a woman ran a red light and hit me and should have killed me, but it didn't. And so we see these things. And now here I am at this point in my life where I don't see myself at this point in my life, but I am at this point. It begins to you want to see, well, how does all this make sense? And thus we got the pursuit of philosophy. And Philo taught me about several things. The first thing that he taught me was that if you believe in God, now Philo called him the infinite being as well, which I find so interesting. Philo saw God as he wrote in one of his points, that the ascendancy of God in thought is beyond our comprehension. And boy, was he right. He also said that if this God was truly a creating God, he would never stop creating. It wouldn't be in his nature. And therefore, all around us, everywhere, right here, this space here, there are living beings. Just because you can't see them, just because they don't exist in our perspective of reality, our perception of vision, doesn't mean they don't exist. Dr. Robert Lanza, in his book Biocentrism, stated that actually reality only exists by what you see. In other words, the house across the street that I know is there doesn't technically, it's not there. Because the laws of the universe, if you look at particularly the 4th law of energy, and that is the conservation of energy. So why would you have structure if you're not observing it? Famous quote, time is a concept looking for a function. Now, here's the other interesting thing. Time is a 4th dimension element. What is it doing in our 3-dimensional spatial reality? When the brain, in actual reality, is that we only see in 2 dimensions. It's the brain that constructs a 3rd dimension view. So if those are concepts that we haven't mastered, Then I began to look at, well, what makes us so sure we mastered the concept of God? If we had known, in my opinion, the true nature of a God, now the infinite being, yes, because that states within itself, it's beyond our comprehension. But let's get back to the whole construct of God. It would be that you would not need the invention of all the world religions. Something's wrong. I mean, if you got one dude, one dudette, or one idiot, I don't know, it seems like that would be pretty much universal. I mean, the concept of us breathing as a species, that's pretty easy to figure out. You see? It's interesting. So here I am. And by the way, I want to give a big shout out to Trisha G. We're going to get this show in, Trisha. Heidi Vandenberg. These two particularly, I'd like to add Sue G in there as well. Now, when someone says something to you months ago that you may not have given a lot of credence to, right? You know, someone once said, before you tell my future, tell me my past. Well, these three intuitives, and I'd have to add to others. There's Jennifer. She's in there talking with her daughter. Wow. There's hope for humanity, folks. The world's not going to end. And this is to Heidi. What's happening in my life right now, and Suji, you pointed it out as well, is happening. So what is this? Is this a manufactured coincidence? Is it serendipity? Is it precognitive programming that I basically got the input put into me through a power of suggestion and that I brought this reality into being? Well, I got a problem with that because there were unknown forces that were unknown to me that, oddly enough, were aligning. So as a philosopher, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with the fact that as I read first century minds, and fortunately, we can now read minds that go back 6,500 years ago. These things are real, or at least to me, because what I have found in the pursuit of knowledge, reality, is subjective to the individual. You know, that was one of the other problems I had in my former faith, was that how could you have one central figure and you've got 30,000 schisms? You see how I look at that today? That's schizophrenia. Schisms, schizophrenia. And, you know, I don't want that anymore. It has taken me almost a year to cleanse myself of this negative energy. That so much of it was that what I did create. And the pursuit of philosophy has opened my mind. My videos are evidence of that. I have the ability now. A lot of these things I didn't have before. I had the traits. I just didn't have the increased stamina of understanding what was going on. And so I think it's the same for every one of you that are in here. There's a reason why men and women come together in the pursuit of mind thought. And that's what wisdom is. It's mind thought. And not tear each other apart. I mean, folks, that's powerful. I don't know about you. I understand energies. I understand psychic thought. We had some characters in the beginning. But the fact is that this group, and there's a core of you in here, and it's growing. It's well now growing beyond something I did not imagine. And so when I see that happening, that tells me there is foundation here. There's something that we can all contribute to and all take away from. And I don't know of another channel on YouTube. If there was such a thing, I probably wouldn't have started this one, but I was told by a voice that woke me up. It's the craziest thing, but it's true. And this voice said, and it didn't say I, it says that we're giving you a platform. It's years ago. And so here we are today, growing in numbers. You know, we bring a lot of people on this channel. And the reason why we do, and I say we, it's collectively. Let me tell you, y'all write to me all the time. Now, a lot of times I get overwhelmed and they get backed up, but I try to get to them. And many of the people that have been on here is because of y'all. You suggested it. And when they come on, they want to come back. I think that's pretty cool, folks. So, and we've got, like I said, there's a council that I see that is forming here. And these are men and women that, you know, to quote the Christ, you know, well, actually, I think it was Solomon who actually said this in Solomon, you know, but we'll quote it anyway, is that you'll know them by their fruits. What do they produce? And it's so true. So we have the answers and we go to a lot of different places. But if there's one thing I have found out about life, wow. You know, I got to the point at one point, I was so much into the corporate world that I lost joy. And I think many of you lost that joy. I don't know. But I know this, it's here in abundance. And, you know, I enjoy this. I enjoy the chance that we can fellowship with one another and, you know, have some laughs, have some debates, shed some tears, and we explore. We explore the things that so often, for instance, we're going to get into smudging. Listen, I think all of us, if we can begin to use the elements of our ancestors, doesn't matter what race they're from, they're our ancestors. And they knew things of Gaia, of Earth. You know, I was thinking about this before we came on, that, you know, I was replaying the Genesis story. And God said, let there be light. And God said, you know, let the trees of the field grow. And it occurred to me, you know, it's like, well, okay, you know, but no matter how you look at this, Earth is the one who had to produce it. And that means Earth is alive. And so if Earth is alive, then she, I believe, loves us. And that's why she provides from herself those elements that will actually help us. We can't see the things that attack us. Many of you I know are like myself. Now, I don't suffer this anymore. That there is, I would just want to say thanks to Karen, AKI the Crystal Queen, that really turned me on. And now I'm learning from a very gifted, wise soul. Going to actually have her on the channel. And then out of nowhere, it was told to me, you need to look into smudging. I did. And lo and behold, it was like the Rhema, the logo suddenly, whoop. And I said, well, why don't we do this collectively? Why don't we get someone who knows? In fact, I have written out to an individual, get a shaman on here, medicine man, male or female, and let's walk through a cleansing exercise for all of our homes collectively. I don't know if that's ever been done, but I think we should do it. That's a lot of positive energy being brought in and concentrated amongst a small group of people. And I think we'll say the blessings as well. Listen, back in the day when, I was an ordained minister, as I taught people all the time, the word blessing, translate and meditate, means empowered to prosper. Blessing, empowered to prosper. So we're going to empower all of us to prosper. And listen, if you prosper in your body, you prosper in your mind, you prosper in your soul, it'll change things around you. It will heal you. It will deliver you. And I think that that's what we're looking for. Okay. It's been awfully fun. I hope this has been fun for everyone. All right. Earth Ascending, listen, let's get you on then. All right. Write me, Karen. We'll get you on. And this is specifically what I'd like to do. All right. So let's do that. Let's do that soon. All right. And I hope you had fun. I hope you had fun. This is what it's about. Tomorrow night, I am bringing on an individual. We're going to be talking about cancer, and we're going to talk about cancer and cannabis specifically. And we're going to have a discussion, and we're going to look into the science. We're going to look into, I think, a lot of other issues that this subject has such great taboo. So that will be tomorrow night. I'm looking on Saturday night to get Milky Way Weekly, Brian, getting Sue G on. See if we can get Jennifer pulled in here, and let's just have some fun. And maybe, Karen, maybe that would be a great night. Saturday night. Think about it. If you can do that, let's incorporate that. So let's do it. Yeah. So get your sage, get your smudge sticks. The thing that I'm waiting for now is the bowl, and I'm studying this. And Karen, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but the bowl is very important. It needs to be something of the earth, and so I am taking care of that. I'll have that taken care of by tomorrow. Okay, yeah. Whatever I have, Jenny, I'll do that. All right, folks. Blessings to you. May you have the most prosperous day for the rest of the day. We'll see y'all tonight over on the Artist First Network at 10 p.m. Eastern. Join me on the Steiger Perspective. We're going to talk about the invisible entities. That video is still one that's I think that we need to really start peeling the onion on that one. Life, anti-life. Not anti in the fact that it's opposite. It's just different. I've been thinking about this. I meditated it in my dreams, that could the passage of when we lay down these bodies, do we go in? Is that what the ether is? Is the ether really the anti-universe? Is it the anti-part of what we don't see? I don't know. Interesting thought, though, isn't it? All right. Appreciate all of you. We'll see you then tomorrow night, if not sooner. All right. Be kind to yourselves. Bye-bye.